afternoon and welcome back. Thank you for joining us this afternoon under Track 2, Role of Corporate Sector in Building Sustainable Livelihoods of the Poor. Through the discussions from our various panelists, the track intends to trace an impact of CSR in promoting and impacting sustainable livelihoods of poor and also explore its role in bringing out innovative programs to impact the poor. We have two exciting sessions lined up under this track. And for this afternoon, we are very fortunate to have Mr. Shankar Venkateshwaran to introduce the track and give you an overview of corporate social responsibility in India. Mr. Venkateshwaran's career, spanning over 35 years, has three distinct yet interrelated phases. His initial years were spent in mainstream business consulting, where he advised companies on improving business performance. He then spent the next phase of his career in social development and international agencies and was engaged in grant making and policy advocacy on a wide range of issues. In his third and current phase, his work is focused on the role of business in society. Currently, he's part of the founding team of eCube Climate Finance that is setting up a fund to invest in publicly listed companies and help them improve their sustainability ESG performance. He also advises companies and NGOs on matters relating to corporate sustainability, CSR, and sustainable development. Thank you, Mr. Venkateshwaran. With this, I hand over the session to you.
Right. Thank you, Kirti, and good afternoon, everyone. I somehow am fortunate enough to get what is always called the graveyard shift in a conference, which is immediately after lunch. I'm sure you guys have all had a nice lunch and are now ready to have your nap. So those of you who are so inclined should continue to do so. And while I just take you through a brief introduction to the track, Kirti's already talked about the two separate portions that we're going to cover in this track. One is a session immediately after this, which I'm going to be moderating, which is on the evolution of CSR in a post-pandemic world. And one after that, which my good friend Ruby Thapar will be moderating, which is on incubating innovations through CSR, both very, very important topics. And I would urge you to stay for both of them because we have some very good panelists. But let me just give you an overview on where we are in the CSR space. The numbers are pretty well known, but it is important to reiterate the numbers just for us to sort of keep track of where we are. We are coming to almost what is the 7th birthday, towards the end of the 7th year of the CSR clause. It came into effect from the financial year 2014-15. And so we have 6 years of full data, and the 7th year data will be coming in the next 6 months. So what's been happening? Up until now, till the data is available, till the financial year 2019-20, the total spends on CSR has been of the order of 80,000 crores. So it's not a small sum of money. It is very significant. And so that's the number that is important to keep at the back of your mind. Over the years, it has grown significantly, and the peak was reached in 2018-19, when in that year, almost 19,000 crores of CSR funds were spent. 1920 saw a huge dip, and I think that reflects the economic conditions. From the high of 18,655 in 1819, it dipped to 40% of that, just under 8,000 crores in 1920. So that tells you this. And I think it's also very telling, and it's important, especially for civil society organizations in this conference, to remember the nature of spends of CSR are not necessarily consistent because they are linked to profits. There is a lot of volatility, as these numbers show. And that's something to keep in mind and remember when you're strategizing your resource mobilization, and to say that how much of your resource mobilization should be dependent on things like CSR. The rest of the data has been pretty standard over the years. There's not been much change. If you look at the top 5 states where the CSR money has gone to, it's been the same. It's Maharashtra, overwhelmingly high, followed by Karnataka, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh, with Delhi occasionally coming in here and there. But that's been the general trend for the last 6 years. In terms of the sectors, it's also been the same: education, health, rural development, and environment. These are the big four. And that's also been pretty consistent over the years. What is also interesting, and again, I think this is something that NGOs should sort of keep in mind and think about it in their CSR strategies, is that an overwhelmingly large number of companies who have a spend of under 50 lakhs a year. So if you plot a graph or just, of the y-axis being the amount of spends and the x-axis just the companies that have spent the money, it will be it is a steep curve that comes down and has an extremely long tail. So the large number of companies, a huge number, something like 70 to 80% of the companies actually spend very little a year. It's not that they're spending less than they should. There is also, if you go to the CSR portal of the MCA, you will find that the number of companies that are complying with that requirement of 2% has actually been improving and increasing. But that's the nature of the fund. So it's a large number of small companies distributed. So that makes it very tough for NGOs who want to raise resources from companies, because you got to really be very tactical about it. I think there's been a lot of critique about the Act, about the way companies operate under the Act. And there's also critiques from companies about how NGOs have been, how the partnership with NGOs have been working. We're going to explore some of that in the first sort of panel that we're going to have. But I think it's important to remember that, like everything, there are some pluses and minuses of this clause. There are some huge pluses. For example, CSR became a board level conversation only after this clause came. Till then, it was sort of floating somewhere in a company, but the moment it becomes a board level conversation, because you have a CSR committee of the board, it gets a little bit more important. It gets a lot more attention, and more companies are sort of wondering what they're doing with the money, asking for information about how it is being spent, how effectively it's being spent, and so on and so forth. So that's a very positive thing. The second thing is there's a lot of transparency. Before this clause came in, we absolutely were clueless about how much of CSR funds were actually being deployed, because it was not required to sort of disclose this data. So some companies would do it voluntarily. Most companies would not even talk about it. And so therefore, getting this data is an important part of a positive of this clause. The other thing which is positive related to this whole issue of transparency is that companies have to put out their policy, their CSR policy, in the public domain. So you don't have to, as an NGO, don't have to wonder, what will this company fund my cause or not fund my cause? Because the company is meant to put out in the public domain what are the kinds of issues, sectors that it is supporting, which makes it a whole lot easier than the old days when you would go to a company with a proposal in education and the guy would say, I only do livelihoods, or vice versa. So I think it's important to leverage the fact that there is more transparency about company spends, and that's a good thing. There are, of course, issues, and we all know that. One issue is and which to me is an important issue, perhaps not for many others, especially those who are looking for funding. But for me, one of the things that I find about the CSR piece is that it's a distraction from responsible business. I'm a great advocate for saying that businesses need to be responsible in everything that they do, right from the way they source their material to how their supply chains are, and the kind of human rights issues and environmental issues in the supply chain within the fence, and then what happens after the product is used and disposed. That whole life cycle, it's very important that businesses act responsibly on all these things. what I find the distraction with CSR is all that gets forgotten and everything gets focused on the CSR. So, it's almost like saying that it doesn't matter if you sin in the way you run your business as long as you atone for it by doing CSR. And to my mind, CSR is important in its own way, but it should not take that away from companies. So one of the things that I keep telling NGOs is, interact with companies on CSR, but make sure that the rest of the business is also run in a responsible way. That's one of the distractions I feel which is uncalled for, but there it is. The second thing that is excluded by the law is that companies can't do what is under the normal course of business. Now, that's sometimes problematic because then it does not allow companies to leverage what they're good at. So a company that's in the health space, and in the COVID times, we know that's important. It sort of almost prevents a company from doing something in the health space, which is really what they're good at, or an IT company in the IT space, and so on and so forth. The third, which I think many NGOs understand, is, and which is why this skew to Maharashtra, for example, in the spends, is this sort of clause around saying you need to focus on the local areas. Now, to my mind, I think it is important that companies focus on the local areas. Don't get me wrong. I think that companies, a responsible business, has to minimize its negative impacts that it has on the community. And the maximum negative impacts that a company has is around its plants. Because the nature of manufacturing is so disruptive that it impacts the environment, it impacts communities and everything around its factory. So I think I have no doubt in my mind that that has to be the first and most important aspect of what a company does in its CSR. But that should not exclude them from doing things elsewhere, doing things where it really matters, going to, say, the aspirational districts, as Niti Aayog has identified them, where the need is huge. But somehow that doesn't really happen, and the focus ends up being in these 4 or 5 states, which not coincidentally are also economically advanced, and so on. The list can go on. So there are problems with this. There are good things and there are bad things, but it's an evolution, and we all need to sort of find a way to make sure that we sort of maximize what is good that comes out of it. A conversation. And this is something that you'll find in the next two the conversations that follow, that you cannot have a conversation of CSR without COVID, because that's the elephant in the room, right? And I think what COVID did is it exposed the fault lines. So many of us in the development space knew these fault lines occurred, were there. They just became more and more apparent. What were these fault lines? I'm sure there's a long list of them, but I'm just going to name 3 from the context of CSR. One is, of course, health infrastructure. We know that the health infrastructure in India is wanting, especially in rural India, but also even in urban India. The sort of concentration that we need to have is still less, especially in the public sector, which is where the poor go for services. And that has been found wanting, and that got exposed very much in the pandemic. The second, again, many people working in development knew this, but the informal sector and the vulnerability of the informal sector was completely exposed. Like I said, many of us in development understand this. We understand the issues of circular migration, how urban India tends to be the magnet that gets people in. But then what did happen was it exposed how vulnerable they are and how much they got impacted. And if you see the Oxfam inequality report, I'm very proud and privileged to be the chair of Oxfam in India. We did point out the fact that the recovery for the rich in the COVID took only 9 months, while the recovery for the poor will take decades. And that's the nature of the pandemic and how these things, how you recover from that. And that's really, really tragic. So the informal sector has been a huge victim and something, and it's always been there, but it is now exposed. The third, of course, is the vulnerability of communities themselves. Why does migration happen? Migration, to my mind, is a simple economic response to the fact that in the places where people migrate from, there are no economic opportunities. So beyond, usually these are single crop areas. So after the harvest, which is around Diwali, around that time, after the harvest, there is no work, and so people migrate. Which means what? Which means that you have an issue of economic work, of livelihoods beyond agriculture, which needs to sort of get enhanced in these places. So that then when people migrate, they migrate voluntarily and not involuntarily, which is the case now. And I think that again has been exposed through COVID. So I think there are huge issues that have come up. These, to many people, were familiar. But the good thing is, to those who were not familiar, and let's assume that many people in the corporate world who deal with CSR money were not familiar with some of these issues, now they have become familiar. So that opens up a new set of things in terms of what you need to do in CSR going forward, and a focus, because this conference is on livelihood, on livelihoods, and how do we sort of get more resources and look at livelihoods in a sustainable manner going forward. So I think much has happened in the CSR space, much needs to happen in the CSR space, and much more will happen only if all of us put our heads together and start pushing the needle, both with companies, us as NGOs in the way we operate ourselves and how we need to change, and then how the regulatory framework and the rules around CSR need to evolve, so that at the end of the day, those who are extremely vulnerable benefit from some of these interventions that happen, and the benefits have to happen in an economically sustainable way. It cannot be any way that you can choose. It has to be based on sound environmental principles and sustainable development principles. And we hope that the conversations that we're going to have after this will give you some insights as to what those ideas and what those options that we have. So thank you again for joining me here, and please stay to listen to the other two panels, which I'm sure you'll find extremely fascinating. Thank you. Back to you, Kirti.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Access, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Venkateswaran for setting the tone of our track on role of corporate sector in building sustainable livelihoods of the poor. We conclude this session here now, and we'll reconvene after a short break for the next session titled The Evolution of CSR in a Post-Pandemic World, Exploring the Way Forward. Thank you, everyone.
नानी क्या बन रहा है?
बेटा तेरी पसंद की चीज बन रही है। हाँ बेटा तेरे लिए सेवैयाँ बन रही है।
और इसके लिए क्या?
सब कुछ बच्चों को खिलाओगे, हमारे लिए भी कुछ बचाओगे।
मेरा नाम नज़मा है। मैं जयपुर शास्त्री नगर की रहने वाली हूँ। मैंने कभी सपने में भी नहीं सोचा था कि एक दिन मैं रिक्शा चलाऊंगी। मैं बधी थी, मेरी ख्वाहिशें बधी थी, मगर अब पिंक सिटी की बदौलत मैं बड़े बड़े सपने देखती। ये मुझसे बचपन से कहती थी मुझे डॉक्टर बनना है, मैं इससे कहती थी तेरे दिमाग का इलाज करा। लेकिन मुझे अब लगता है कि मैं इसे अब डॉक्टर ही बनाऊंगी। अब मेरी जिंदगी की गाड़ी मेरे हाथों में है, इसे कितना चलाना है, कैसे चलाना है, सब मैं तय करूंगी। ये सच है, मेरी आमदनी बढ़ी है, मगर उससे भी ज्यादा जब मैं रिक्शा चलाती हूँ तो मुझे सुकून मिलता है। ऐसा लगता है जैसे मैं कैद में थी और अचानक आजाद हो गई। मैं चाहती हूँ औरतें परिवार भी चलाएं, रिक्शा भी और देश भी।
Jaipur, the Pink City, is among the foremost tourist destinations of India. Like most other urban centers, it is marred by burgeoning population and increasing pollution. However, a unique new initiative is all set to change that. The Pink City Rickshaw Company project is a unique initiative on wheels in the city of Jaipur. The beautiful city of Jaipur is home to some of the most popular tourist destinations of India. And the Pink City Rickshaw Company project presents a whole new vantage point to experience the myriad charms of Jaipur. Designed as a completely women-led, managed and owned social enterprise, the project envisages providing long-term employment to 200 women through their ownership in the Pink City Rickshaw Company, thereby ensuring their economic and social empowerment.
The Pink City Rickshaw Company was conceptualized with the idea of addressing the growing urban poverty in Rajasthan. We are trying to create a social enterprise. So this will be a company which is going to be owned by these ladies. Through this program, we want 200 empowered women to run the rickshaw company, run tours, attain a sustainable incremental income, and being shareholders of the company, actually run this company.
एक बार तो डर लगा सर, लेकिन फिर बाद में अच्छा लगना लग गया। रिक्शा चलाते वक्त अच्छा महसूस होता है, लोग बाग हमारे को देखते हैं, औरतें रिक्शा चला रही है।
एक दिन भी कभी इनको भी देखते तो अपन भी यही चलाएंगे, नसीब में होगा तो। आज हमारे नसीब में है, अच्छा लग रहा है।
This is one of the few programs that we have in Access which is looking at women's empowerment. More importantly, this program is trying to seek triple bottom line impact. Through the program, we are trying to see if we can build economic empowerment of the women. We are also looking at creating a company which will be owned and managed by these women and will develop some kind of a social capital. And because we are going to deploy e-rickshaws in the project, we will also be impacting on the environment issues. So for me, it is a very innovative project and it's already rolling out, and there is a lot of buzz and excitement about the program in Jaipur where we are implementing it.
Some people from Access approached me and they gave me this concept of Pink City Rickshaw Company. these women are going to be the owners of the company in due course of time. This is something really good, and it would lead to empowerment of these women who would have never thought in their wildest dreams that they would be owning a company. The Transport Department will be very happy to be associated with this service, to provide all facilities to these women drivers, and if there is any issue, I'll be very happy to resolve it.
So there's been a great reception by the market to the product. Our target market are the hotels who have niche clients who would want to visit all the historic places of Jaipur or travel into the walled cities. It's also a very nice looking rickshaw. So through this project,
Welcome back everyone. We'll now begin the session, The Evolution of CSR in a Post-Pandemic World, Exploring the Ways Forward. I warmly welcome the moderator for this session, Mr. Shankar Venkateshwaran, Advisor, Sustainability Business Society Co-Founder, EQ Climate Finance and Chairperson, Oxfam India. I would now like to invite our esteemed guests, Mr. Ishtiaq Amjad, Vice President, Public Affairs and Communication, Coca-Cola India and Southwest Asia, Mr. Rohan Sharma, Senior PM and Lead, LTD Practice, TIS Center for Excellence in CSR, and Ms. Meenu Vadera, Founder and Executive Director, Azad Foundation. Thank you everyone once again, and I now hand over the session to our moderator.
Right. Thank you, Kirti, and good afternoon, everyone. Back to this first panel, and I have the privilege of being able to moderate three really very good panelists who you see in front of you. We have Ishtiaq, as you know, from Coke, Meenu from Azad, and Rohan from TIS. Just in terms of backdrop, and I did give some sort of a backdrop before this session started to the track itself. And I just to sort of recap a few things, we said that there are many good things that came out of the CSR clause, lots of positives, both for the companies as well as for the civil society world and the development world in general. And like everything else, there are things that could change, can change, and because this is a continuously evolutionary process. And that has, we've been seeing those changes over the last few years. That has even been coming from the MCA. In fact, the MCA tweaks have been as recent as January, and we're going to ask Rohan to speak to some of those tweaks over the years and more recent ones. But what, as I was saying earlier too, what we can't avoid is the elephant in the room, which is COVID. And I think what COVID has done, as I again said earlier, but important to emphasize to those who've just joined us, it has actually exposed a lot of the fault lines that existed. So they were nothing new. They were just invisible, and it just made a lot of them visible. And there are plenty. You ask 5 people, they'll give you a list of 20. I'm just going to emphasize on 2-3 of them because I think they are probably relevant for our conversation, especially CSR livelihoods in that context. One is, of course, what happened to the informal sector. The fact that an informal sector exists was known, has been known for a long time. The Sengupta committee report first talked about the fact that 92 to 93% of those employed in the employable age are in the informal sector, which means there is no stability of wage, of work, of hours of work, of quality of work. All that is, that's been talked about for a long time, and 93% is a huge number. A bulk of them are in agriculture, but a lot of them are in other professions. A lot of them are also in urban. So some of those things were known, but what did come out, especially after the pandemic, was the fact that how many of them completely impact our day-to-day lives. And that was something that came as a surprise to some. To many of those who work in the development sector, the tempting thing was to say, I told you so, but it was just such a human tragedy that it was not worth getting into that. And it was more about trying to see what we can do about it. The second, of course, is the public health system. And we all know, again, the numbers that the investments in public health has been so low, abysmally low in India. And I think that, again, was exposed. Having said that, I think the response from the public sector, however meager it is in terms of resources, was actually phenomenal. And I think that's something to laud. The fact that the public sector, health sector actually responded. The fact that it was so thin on the ground was the tragedy that we all had to look at. And I think what did come out as a third thing in my mind is the fact that you have circular migrants. And the reason a lot of them are migrants is not because they are voluntarily migrate, they are involuntary migrants, which means that the livelihoods and economic situation in the places where they migrate from is abysmal. And it again leads us to thinking that what are we doing in those places from where people are migrating to see why do they have to do this? If they voluntarily do this, many of us have migrated to cities from wherever. We are voluntary migrants. We are able to do that. Why do you have to end up migrating? Because you have no choice. And when you have no choice and you migrate, the terms in which you migrate are obviously abysmal. So what can we do? And that's, to my mind, one of the agenda that we need to see going forward. What can we do to ensure that people who wish to migrate, doing it because they wish to migrate and not because they have to migrate? And I think these are some of the things that, in my mind, came out very much from the pandemic. And that's some of the issues that we're going to sort of discuss. And like has been said umpteen number of times, a crisis like a pandemic is also a good way to reset and restart it. And we are hoping that this will be a new beginning. And that's what we're going to discuss with our panelists. So what are the development challenges that we're going to face going forward, which already existed but got exposed? What are the new ones that are likely to happen? How will these challenges impact how companies look at CSR and how NGOs look at their work and how they see their relationship with companies? What are the opportunities that we have to work together? And what are the further changes that we could think of in the regulatory environment that could enable such a process to happen better and more effectively? So these are some of the broad questions that we're going to be discussing in this panel. So let me start, Rohan, if I may, with you. As an academic who's been sort of studying this over the years, what is your overview that you can give us of the CSR scenario? We know the evolution somewhat, but where are we in that whole space in terms of what does the data tell us? What are the kinds of things for you as a researcher that strikes you about the CSR work over the last so many years?
Right. So thank you very much, Shankar, and thank you for having me on this very illustrious panel. I'll take off from where you left, and I think the pandemic has definitely visibilized the invisibles. So it was very much there, but somehow today, it has brought it out to the fore, and we cannot no longer escape it. Now, for example, you mentioned about migration. You mentioned about informal, laborers. You mentioned about construction workers, etc. All those who have been, affected. But I think CSR companies, civil society organizations, we all knew about these existing throughout. But I don't think that any CSR has really engaged. They have, and I'll substantiate this with with some data. And I think that we need to keep in mind that COVID has certainly exacerbated the inequality. So, I'll use a term called COVID-induced inequalities. So, for example, there is one school of thought which is saying how COVID is a great leveler because, everybody has been equally affected. I completely disagree with that. There have been some vulnerable sections who have been even more, made more vulnerable. People who are at the margins have been pushed further into oblivion. So I think they are no longer even visible at the margins. To start off with, I am very uncomfortable with using the term CSR as corporate social responsibility. So for me, CSR is actually CSR, but corporate community story of rapport, right? So for me, I think COVID has also shown us how interconnected the world is. And, coming from that chain of thought, I think that the fact that business and society is so interconnected and interrelated, we need to keep that in mind. So far, and I think the direction of CSR, and since just to talk about the overview, how I look at it. So one is, I don't think CSR as corporate social responsibility. I would like to use the term CPS, which is more of collaborative problem solving. And definitely we have a problem at hand. We have always had a problem at hand. For example, we have not been giving enough attention to our, say, for example, women who are in the informal space. We have not been giving enough attention to the elderly. We have not been giving enough attention to adolescents in CSR, And I'll come to that and how data is giving us more or less a kind of a broader picture. For example, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data says that education, health, and rural development have been the large 3 areas where CSR spending has been done consistently from 2014. But we don't know within education. Are we talking of primary education? Are we talking of secondary? Are we talking of education among the tribals? What kind of data? And that data does not exist. And at the end, I'll come when I talk about the way forward. I'll tell you what I think is the way forward. So clearly, there is a data deficit. Because so far CSR has largely been seen as an HR function. Or in India, I think this is what also the MCA and when CSR was mandated for the public sector enterprises, it was always governed by the philosophy of comply or explain. And I think that thought has, continues even with the amendment to the CSR rules. All that you have to, I think we are too focused on the compliance part of it. And we need to understand that if CSR is a means to an end, CSR is not an end. Spending the money is not an end. But if CSR is a means to an end, and which I think has in recent years, the focus has moved, companies and boards are understanding that CSR ought to be aligned with the SDGs, which even earlier were the MDGs, and how we need to align it to a larger picture, not just, I do my spending, etc. There is some sort of change happening. But for me, CSR, I don't like to use the word, it is about collaborative problem solving. Unfortunately, in India, I have not seen, and even the research shows, in fact, I was part of a study in 2012, which was a policy level study. We tried to, and taking off from what you said, Shankar, very interesting, that this whole migration, the pattern of migration being involuntary, means people are forced out of. And this is what even the data shows. So for example, I'll tell you, that the states which account for more than 55% of the aspirational districts account for only a meager 9% of the CSR total expenditure. So clearly there is enough data to suggest that CSR expenditure, CSR focus is very skewed. And given this picture way back in 2012, I led a study on behalf of TIS, where we tried to understand the scope of CSR in backward districts of India, which today have been called aspirational districts. So the whole idea is that, are we continuing to saturate thematic areas? Okay, education, fine, but are we? What is what kind of education? We are, for example, in my recent interactions, companies are not able to understand that health and sanitation are interlinked. Going forward in the pandemic, you will see a lot of CSR, and majority of CSR focus will be on preventive healthcare. Yes, but are we also looking at the interconnections and interrelations between thematics? Okay, or are we just, and this is what I fear. So while I am very supportive, and I see the history being repeated itself in terms of the whole focus that was given on the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. It is almost like a herd mentality. So while, I think that corporate sector has been extremely generous during COVID, and there is no doubt about that, somehow I feel that innovative thinking or autonomous thinking has not really happened, which corporates are known for. So if you really go back to the whole, when the CSR legislation was being formed, the government of India was very clear. We do not want funds or money from corporate sector. We want your managerial expertise. We want your innovative thinking to help us achieve the national development goals. So I think unless corporate sector realizes it's not the funds that government wants from them, because even the whole support, and the data shows, Indian Express, August 19, 2020, 38 PSUs are given 2105 crore to the PM CARES, which is great. I mean, they are definitely, responding to the calls. But this, I feel, my fear is that this will be another repeat of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. A lot of money is coming in, but you are not collaborating. I don't see that collaboration happening. Even among NGOs, Shankar, given there's a lot of confusion among NGOs because, given the strict regulatory frameworks that are coming, given the new players, and I'll talk about that when we talk about how international organizations should have also been brought into the ambit of CSR implementing agencies. There's a lot of, I would say, insecurity. Even NGOs don't want to collaborate. So if you're talking about, a scale of impact, of bringing about transformations, it cannot happen with just money going into a fund. And I think development problems need development solutions. And that is where, civil society organizations, academics, it needs to, and that's where I think this kind of a summit is so important, because we have representation from all stakeholders. And the last thing, just before, I end, is basically, I think that for me, again, CSR is not very important. What is more important for me is the whole responsible business, because CSR in India has continued to be external. But if you look at the West, all the countries that have really done well, and that's something that Shankar, you and me are very, very passionate about, is this whole thing of ethical business. And I'm so happy that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has, understood this. And in 2019, we have today the national guidelines on responsible business conduct. So, it doesn't matter what you do externally, but it also matters that how, responsible are you being as a business? In terms of, are you taking care of the layoffs that the pandemic has forced you? Are you could be giving a lot of funds to see, to an NGO, but if you are being irresponsible in the way you conduct your business, I think, the net sum is zero. So
yeah. Thanks, Rohan. I think that's a lot of inputs that you gave, and all of them very relevant. And we need to, pick up each one of them at a time. But I think there are some very important ones that you made, and I think we should. We fortunately have two other panelists who come from the sectors that they're talking about, where collaboration, and that's very central to what you said, is a key part of what we need to do. So what is the questions around collaboration? What is the things beyond money? And I think it's very important that you reminded us of the original philosophical sort of construct of the clause 135, which is about companies saying, but companies being asked not just to write a check, but to actually contribute in more ways than just writing the check. But I think, again, underlining what companies should also remember that they're very good at what they do. They're not necessarily very good at development. And therefore, the case for collaboration becomes even stronger. So thank you for those very interesting points, Rohan. We'll just come back to you. But let me go to you, Ishtiaq, because I think the role of companies obviously is central in all this, and we need to get a sense from you. So in a sense, you're both, I guess, in this panel representing Coke, but also representing the sector in some ways. But let me start with your wearing just your Coke hat, and just to tell us about how, as Coca-Cola, as a company, how do you see CSR? How has it changed? How has it evolved over times? And how has the last year been, especially because the last year, the pandemic time, was obviously very difficult times. And I think Rohan made this interesting point about responsible business versus CSR. Unfortunately, it's very often versus CSR. But just some thoughts on how Coca-Cola as a company sees some of these developments in the past.
Thanks, Shankar. Thanks, Rohan, for a very, very profound sort of early conversation and setting up this stage. And I think you've asked all the relevant questions. And okay, so let me be as honest as I can be, and I'm always is. I'll tell you something very interesting. Many years back, I was once invited to give a TED talk, and in one of the introduction, the way I was kind of interacting with the organizer, one of the college students who was making this introduction said that after having conversed with Ishtiaq, I realized that he has a capitalist mind and an activist heart, which I guess is the call of the day for all of us in corporate sector, because there is a capitalist solution to a lot of development problems as long as you feel it at your heart, and that's the critical part. And I think one of the important things that we need to really make distinction of is that there's something known as a cost of doing business, which is not CSR. So if you just take for example, Coca-Cola, we are a beverage company, which means that the primary ingredient for all our products is water. Now, if I go back and replenish water and be water positive and do all those things, it's not I'm not doing any favor to the nation or the society or the ecology. That's expected of me. Our products are given in plastic packages. If I go and clean it up and make sure that every package that's put out in the marketplace is kind of, taken back and recycled, that's not CSR, right? CSR is something which is slightly beyond that. And I really love the way you've used this term, Rohan, CPS. It's a collaborative problem solving because we are all part of the same ecosystem. We're part of the same society, right? So one of the important things that we have done in the last few years is that we said, okay, let's understand our entire value chain. Who are we? Why do we exist? And how do we operate? And if you understand each one of these elements, then you know where are the issues where you can really make a difference. For example, it was almost it was an existing fact that came as a revelation for us that we are one of the largest user of fruits in India because of our fruit juices and fruit drinks. Now, that's a big piece in which we can make a difference with the farmers of India. We know the way, the cash crop shift has happened from a typical, agriculture practices that's been happening in many, many years. And that's where the farmers of India can really make a lot of difference, right? So we started to work around that. It was just by default that we did that in mango. We then took that learning, redeployed it with oranges, then with apples, then with grapes, with lychees and all of that. And that really sort of started to create a network for us. We call it the fruit circular economy because right from the farmers to the consumer, that you are in position to make that sort of a linkage. We are, at the end of the day, we are a sales and marketing company, right? So you can create consumer demand, you can influence their choices, you can provide them solutions that really matters to them. So 3 focus area for us is, of course, water. World Without Waste is all about packaging solutions, in terms of having better packages, in terms of collecting them, having partnership and all of that. And third one is the fruit circular economy. That's broadly the sort of an overarching kind of a philosophy. I'll specifically come to COVID-19 and respond to, Rohan, what you've said. And, it hit the world with such suddenness that nobody really knew how to really react to it. When it was actually declared pandemic in the second week of March, incidentally, the CEO and chairman of Coca-Cola was in this region. He was in Mumbai, then he went to Dhaka, and from there he went back, and that's when the lockdown happened. We were having this conversation. One of those things which really came out very interestingly, I don't know if it got noticed or not, being a sales and marketing company, we realized that there's a huge amount of money that we invest in our branding and advertisement and marketing. And we said we will go dark for next many, many months because it is an important element of our business. That money can actually be saved and deployed for community work. Because at the end of the day, we are a for-profit organization. Bottom lines, top lines matter to us. So if you were, for example, in India, we committed and spent over 100 crores in a span of 2 to 3 months. That's not the kind of money we spend on CSR. That's a fact. So you need to find innovative way of bringing those things together. It's also a time when, incidentally, if you really think of the beverages company, a lot of our businesses happen in summer. And the pandemic started to hit in March. So we had a lot of our beverages available to us, which in a normal course of business would have been provided for in the normal distribution system. We took all those beverages and ensured that all these migrant laborers who were going all over the places, we tied up with NGOs, with Gurdwara, district administrations and all of that and started providing them because that's something you can do immediately. That's an immediate response to it. Then in second phase, we went about, PPEs and other stuff and things like that. But there's something more important than that, and which again, Rohan and you talked about it, which is essentially the cause of business. Because we work in a sector which provides a huge value chain employment, right from the farmers to the last mile retailer who just has, if you walk on the streets of Calcutta, you will have these kiosks which only has a Coke fridge, and that's the shop. You got to make sure that those people are back in business because that's where they really run their entire sort of, family and all of that. And the last thing that I will say is one thing which really came out very, very strongly in COVID is our entire expansion of network, both in terms of supply chain and also in terms of our manufacturing and distribution. We have 54 plants in India. There were hotspots, there were red zones where we could not operate because of the higher COVID incidence, but there were other places where it was not that badly impacted. So I think somewhere we have to really find a way of taking opportunities where talent is. And, all of us, as you've said, are migrant laborer. Some of us have done it through knowledge. Some do it out of skills. Many of us do it out of desperation. And unless we take these opportunities to the last miles of India, I think we'll continue to struggle. And thankfully, COVID has challenged some of those notions in some way. I know it is a very high cost and price to pay, but I'm glad that these notions are being challenged, that everybody needs to come to the mega cities and get employed there. So I'll stop here and happy to take the questions as we go forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Ishtiaq. I think, again, very, very important points. And I think what perhaps from the way you describe what you did as a company is, I think, important because, it is very easy to sort of say that, okay, I will sort of not worry about how my business runs as long as I do my CSR. And it again goes to what Rohan was saying was a compliance issue. But if in the way you run your business, you're actually impacting negatively the environment and society, then what's the point of doing CSR? I often, laughingly call it the Hindu way of life. You sin all your life and then go to Kedarnath and then wash your sins and then come back and sin again. Pointless to do that. You might as well not sin in the first place. So I think it's important for companies to keep that responsible business aspect central to what they do, and CSR should be built around that. And that's the point I think, Rohan, you made very well. So thanks, Ishtiaq. That was very helpful to understand the context. And I didn't know, and this is interesting information, that you used the reduction in costs from your ad spends to actually do more of work in CSR. That's actually quite admirable, and that's news to me, and I must talk about it in other fora when I get a chance, because that's really, really good. Meenu, if I may come to you, and you sort of been listening to both Rohan and Ishtiaq, and I'm sure there are lots of things buzzing in your head. But first, if you can just tell us what Azad Foundation does, and just to sort of place a context. And I think it's very important that people who are not familiar with Azad understand, because this is, after all, a livelihood summit, and that's core to what you do. And I think it's important that they understand what you do. But also, after giving us that introduction, if you could just start, talk to us about some of the experiences you've had on CSR in working with companies in terms of how those experiences have been. So if we can just get a bit more into the experiences on CSR after you talk about Azad, I think that would be very helpful. Over to you, Meenu.
Okay, thank you, Shankar. Thanks for inviting me to this very stimulating discussion. As you said in the beginning, COVID has highlighted inequalities which have always existed in our society. And one of those which we have focused on in our work is really the participation of women in the workforce. India is one of the very, very few countries where women's participation in workforce has actually been declining. And pre-COVID, they were, the statistics were like 18 or 19% of women were in the workforce, as against 72% of men, and of course, as against much higher percentages in other countries. So, and a large majority, 90% and more of these 18% women are actually in the informal sector. So when Azad was set up in 2008, our understanding was to reach out to these resource poor women, as we call them. And we look at models of providing remunerative livelihoods with dignity. Now, why I say remunerative is because traditionally, when we look at women and work, there are kinds of very traditional interventions, beautician, cooking, papad, all that kind of stuff, which does nothing wrong with it, but which does not add significant incomes to the women. But it definitely adds to the many number of hours of work that they do. And because majority of them are in the informal sector, there is very little dignity, very little safety, and a whole lot of challenges around it. So we were on a quest to identify, options which are outside this kind of a domain. And when you look outside this domain, vertically and horizontally, most of it is very masculine, very occupied by men. So the group of women that we were looking at, which is the urban resource poor women, looking at them, the one livelihood that we zeroed down on is driving, because it has very low entry barriers. But the fact is that there are a whole lot of social, cultured, gendered norms in our society which do not allow women, starting from their families, homes, communities, such skill opportunities available, and the markets, which will give women this opportunity to participate. So Azad set up in 2008 with an ambition to, break through, to set up a disruptive program that breaks through these norms across all levels. And we started by training women to become professional chauffeurs. And we understand that, that women are not in these kinds of livelihood options, not because they don't want to. I mean, it's not a coincidence that we don't have women drivers or plumbers or masons, not just in India, but across the world by and large. And therefore, there are structural, barriers which prevent them to taking on these occupations. And therefore, if you want them to sustain, the training cannot be just focused on the skill training. So the training itself has to be about rights, about there is no work which can be done with women which does not take into account the reality of violence in their lives, both in private and public spaces. The sexuality, the issues around keeping themselves safe. So a lot of work that Azad does, one part of it is skill training, which is, around driving, but it's also about rights-based training. It's also about life skills training, English speaking, grooming and work preparedness and all of that. And a lot of work on counseling, because, living in continuous situations of deprivation and lack of, basic amenities does lead to a state of mind where people believe that they cannot do things, which they actually can. And so Azad does a whole lot of work around this. We do a lot of ecosystem building work. We work with young men in the bastis, helping them understand, because it's impossible to bring women into the workforce if they have to continue to do twice or thrice the work that men do in their lives. So, looking at issues of unpaid care work and violence from men's perspective and coming up with an alternate understanding of masculinity. We work with the adolescent girls in schools who are, school to work transition, trying to cover that space. And of course, a lot of research and advocacy work around this. And we have also set up a company called Sakha, which then provides employment opportunities to women who are trained as chauffeurs through the various verticals that it has. It also has a counter at the airport now, and it employs, so overall, between 2008 to now, Azad has trained more than 2,500 women as professional chauffeurs. And the professional chauffeurs have been able to, like today, I would say in North India, if you were to find a woman chauffeur, 95% of the chances are that she would have been trained by Azad. Delhi's first woman bus driver has gone from us. And there are many other organizations, corporates and five-star hotels, etc. Slowly, the market is beginning to open up and accept women as professional chauffeurs. So it has been, of course, a long journey of, 2 steps ahead and 1 step back very often. And in terms of our experience in CSR, so yeah, I would say that, when we started, I must say that actually, incidentally, Azad's first grant came from a CSR funding. And that happened to be a very useful grant, because the person came, we were just beginning, saw the work, and they said, here's a flexible grant. You and your board can decide how you want to use it, which was so important. I don't think we would be where we are if we didn't have that kind of a support. And because it allowed us to make all the mistakes that we had to make in order to come up, to learn what is, since there was no other initiative like that, there had to be a lot of mistakes made before we kind of found our way. But having said that, in the first few years, a majority of our funding was through foundations and, other development aid organizations. And 3-4 years ago, I think we took a conscious decision that we would like to, increase the sort of Indian money into our into our work, etc. And we started approaching CSRs, and the CSR funding at that point in time, was becoming more and more popular as well. And so over the last few years, yes, we have worked with a lot of CSR partners, mostly through financial grants supporting our programs. I think a lot of our CSR partners have found the women training program as something very interesting. We've also had an experience of corporate payroll giving, where year on year in one corporate, the staff have contributed from their salaries. In one case, we've had a CSR partner where they have actually helped us to develop a technology solution apart from giving funding, so that the work can become a little easier on the ground. In some cases, sponsorship of fundraising events. And last year, we did get a lot of CSR support to reach out to the communities with active COVID relief kind of work in terms of, just simply food security to the households, or even in terms of helping bridge the digital divide, that existed in terms of providing mobile phones, etc. The challenge, if I can say that, has been that, the ecosystem building work, which is really very important. Like, training the women is fine, but to bring the women from their families to the training center, there's a lot of community level mobilization work which needs to be done. Like I said, there's a lot of work to be done with young men and all of that. That very often, seems to be very gray to the CSR companies. They do not see that as work. It's like taken for granted that women will come to the training center, which is actually completely different from what the reality is. And which is why the entire national skill development program actually, I think, has not met the objectives that it should, because in the first place, the information itself does not reach the women in their homes. So I think the ecosystem building work, which is very important, is something which doesn't really get understood. The empowerment component. So very often we have to answer the question, why should it take 8 months to train a woman to become a professional chauffeur? And to have, this kind of understanding that if you grow up in a surrounding, like as against, some of us, like you grow up and there's a car in the house, but you grow up in a surrounding where when you are an adult, you've not even been inside a car. And then to become a professional chauffeur of an automatic Scorpio or a Honda, in a Greater Kailash kind of a locality where you would have not even had the confidence to go in. There are lots of, these jumps that people have to make. So it's not just the skill work which needs to be supported, So that part of it, I think, is a challenge that is very often missed. And then I would think that even in terms of working with we very often find that there's very, very little understanding of institution building. So yes, I'm ready to give you support for programs, but there is no support for an HR function, yes, perhaps for a finance function, because that's something that's very important, but not for an HR function, not for capacity building, not for, director's role or, all that kind of stuff. So it's like, so who's going to do the work and, kind of a thing. And finally, I think the biggest challenge is that very often we live year to year, and it's like very often I ask myself this question, like, how does anybody expect that, that organizations, if you are really supporting social change effort on the ground, you can't live firstly from year to year. You cannot report social change and transformation in quarterly reports, because social change and transformation takes years and years of work. And many times, like we see all around us, it is 5 steps ahead and 10 steps back, But is there any space for that kind of a thing? Because then it's considered as money which has been wasted. So I think there are lots of challenges at that level. But yes, I think at least through CSR, there is an increased contribution of Indian money coming into the development space.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Meenu. And I think the challenges are very real. I mean, I think you've said that it's an interesting balance, that it is important Indian money coming in, and there are many things that companies can provide beyond writing the check. All that is good, but as you said, there are some very core development processes that are not easy to measure and report or stick a board against. So that's, I think, usually a challenge with CSR, and I think it's an interesting discussion. We need to take that forward, and we will. But I just want to come back to Rohan. I mean, I think in a way this is a good segue to you talking about what you've been hearing, because of the fact that in your work you listen to a lot of companies and NGOs, especially do a lot of work with PSUs. I remember you telling us about this work that you've done for PSUs in terms of helping them figure out who to partner with and so on. So I think, and the challenges that Meenu talked about, very real challenges. And you, in a sense, refer to it even when you made your opening presentation about understanding development and development processes, because they are far more complex than just running a workshop, a skill building workshop, the point that Meenu was making. So how do you respond to challenges and that Meenu talked about? What are you hearing? And I'm sure companies that you interact with, PSUs and private sector, would also be talking about some of the challenges that they face when they're talking about implementing implementing CSR. What is your take on that? And one final thing I just want to put into that mix of your responses. I'm sorry, it's getting to be a little complex of a question, but one of the things that the numbers tell us is that the large number of companies, actually their spends are under 50 lakhs a year. You have a few companies that spend a large amount every year on CSR, but I think about 80% of them spend under 50 lakhs. So do companies come to an organization like TISS, to an institution like TISS, and say, we got these small sums of money and it doesn't go anywhere. How do we work with this? So are there solutions around that? So a set of these things broadly around the implementation challenges that you've run into during your work.
Right. So thank you very much, and I particularly thank you for making it complex, because I think when we're talking of development has to be complex. Development is nuanced. Development is layered. Development is not sanitized. So I think this is something that civil society organizations understand. I think problem is structural. So I'll go back by giving an example. I remember, whichever company we used to work with, TISS, they came and told us one mandate. Hamara CSR Tata jaise kar dijiye. Right? Now, every time we told them that, see, you need to understand that Tata, it has an organizational culture. They are a different, in the learning curve, they have come a long way off. You have probably started. And that is why even this, there's a lot of criticism. I have a fairly balanced perspective on most things. So I'll tell you the pros and cons. So there's a lot of brouhaha that, because of this, all funds, CSR funds going to the PM CARES, etc., as a donations, etc., a lot of funds have been diverted from, what NGOs were usually given. Now, I think we need to understand this in terms of priority, right? Now, if this is an immediate pandemic, this is a knee-jerk reaction. So we, of course, that's what I think the whole triad of business, civil society, and business, state, and civil society needs to be understood. And to draw from what Ishtiaq was saying, I think what this pandemic has done, it has actually, completely gone at war with our friend Milton Friedman's ghost, because he said the business of business is business. So the COVID pandemic has taught business the business of business is not business anymore. Business cannot be done as usual. So what I really think a sustainable way out of this, since we're having a very focused discussion vis-a-vis CSR and COVID, I think how I look at it is that in times to come, the CSR is going to matter very, very less, because increasingly I also hear that there are certain ministries which are looking at creating a fund towards social security, etc. So I think this thing of creating a fund, and this is something that towards the end when we talk about the amended rules, which again we have to that is the framework that is given to the country by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and there is no point saying what could be, what will be, and that is what it has to be. My gut is that increasingly this creation of funds and koshis are going to increase. So more and more CSR funds will go into that. You need to understand it structurally. It's not about individuals. It's not about, structurally, especially for PSUs, you need to understand that they are very well-intentioned people. And to draw from what Meenu was saying, I think the problem with CSR is lack of institutionalization. And that is also to be seen in the whole corporate structure. For example, in the PSU, you might have a very well-intentioned CMD, but the CMD will stay for a year. And that's what earlier corporate philanthropy used to happen. It was a very one-person driven. Today, of course, you have guidelines, etc. But till companies understand, today I work, I travel to the length and breadth before COVID. My work is largely in the left-wing extremist affected areas. And I find when I speak to the PSUs who are doing CSR, they're very, very well-intentioned. And that's a question I wanted to flag, that Ishtiaq said that, it's very good that, the Coca-Cola did a reduction in advertisement spend and spent it for community work. But my question is, will the MCA actually accept this as part of CSR? I don't think so. So even though companies want to do good in their, by following supply chain or value chain responsibility, the moment it comes to the administrative part of it, and that is very demotivating. So, Coca-Cola is doing this with all their good intentions. But when it comes to reporting, that has to probably be reported separately. That will not come under CSR. So, I think, and that's why I go back to my original point, that we are still in this compliance-driven CSR. We are not in this engaged CSR. India does not allow companies, and I think, I wouldn't say it doesn't allow, I think till 2018 it did not allow. But I think that, MCA has some great minds right now. And I was, honestly, extremely thrilled when the national guidelines, but remember, those are just guidelines on responsible business conduct. And I think this is going to be the future of CSR. If really CSR has to be a force to reckon with in India, this 2% will not, like I repeat, that, government of India doesn't want funds. It doesn't expect funds from corporate sector. Government has enough funds of its own. And I think that is where now that the shift of change in thinking should be, and my work in the last 3 years has been in working with CSR thought leaders. Because today, if you see, the CSR rules very clearly make CSR a top-down agenda. It's not even the CSR board level committee anymore. As on January 22nd, it is the board. The board has all the powers to decide how the company wants to move. Having said that, again, bringing the context, and I'll come to the implementation a little later. I'm sorry if I'm taking a little more time in this, but I think to understand this structurally is important. So if you look at how, the whole evolution of CSR, initially it was more driven by culture, I would say. So when you saw, individual philanthropists, they made, like the NCP, etc., right? These are, they wanted to build cultures. The whole focus, I feel, was on creating centers, institutions, right? From there was a shift, to the political, CSR being driven very politically, where today, you had directives from the government, from the district collector saying, you have to do this and you have to do that. And CSR was still not, it was in a formative stage. The NVGs had not come out. I'm talking about this in the 60s or 70s. Gradually, with the guidelines and the law in 2013, I think CSR moves to the social. And when it moves to the social, I mean that there was an alignment with the SDGs. So business is beginning to realize that, we need to align our giving with a larger. It cannot just be random giving, because see, you cannot, and this is the problem with NGOs. You can never ever say this NGO is good or bad, because, on principle, an NGO is set up to do good. Now, that good is problematic. And I'm coming to this, I'll explain this when I again disagree with impact assessment. I am more bothered about damage assessment. I never use the word impact assessment. Okay? Because, impact by default is seen as, only good things happening. But my question is, what about the attributing factors? How can you attribute that change to yourself? There could be so many other factors that have caused the impact. So I can go on about that separately, so I'll keep it out. So basically, after social, I think then in recent years, CSR has really evolved, and different companies are on different stages of the learning curve. That is very important to understand. So everybody cannot do CSR like Tata's. Everybody cannot do it like Mr. Azim Premji. We need to understand that, and that is what I think is the core. Number one, when I say that CSR gets aligned from the cultural to the political to the social to the economic, I'm talking about strategic CSR, where today government, companies the boards are increasingly saying, why are we investing in this project and not that project? Does it make sense for us? And this, I think, is a very, very relevant ask. So, for example, Coca-Cola will say, why am I doing this? Are they in my supply chain? Do these people even matter in the way I do business? So that was a great move. But somehow I feel with the, a lot of funds going to the PM Cares, again, from the economic, there's a back to the political, where, you are being dictated. So I think that balance is always tough. And like I'm saying that, I'm not saying what is good or bad. I think that this is a knee-jerk reaction. Having said that, and that is bound to happen in a pandemic because everything is unclear. But we should not have this myopic vision, is what I'm saying. NGOs, so I spoke about the corporate so far. As far as, not-for-profits are concerned, I have a problem with this whole looking at this entire sector as NGOs, There is a tendency to homogenize, and I've seen this across corporates, private sector, public sector, senior, junior, NGO chahiye. Now, NGO bol ke kuch hota nahi hai. They are a not-for-profit. You have different types of organizations, right? And homogenizing them is a problem. And therefore, today, when I remember in 2012, when I designed an assessment, national level assessment framework, which is still, continuing to be used, the AESDI, what we said is that you need to understand the journeys, and that is where the methodology was also different. So we use a mixed methods approach, not just a purely financial due diligence model, because then the grassroots organizations are automatically excluded. But remember, eventually it is those grassroots organizations who are doing the work. So I have always told the corporates that when you're doing a training program, please don't train your CSR managers. They have come from good business schools. They know it all. They don't need capacity building. Neither does, Oxfam need capacity building. Neither does ActionAid need capacity building. But you need to support the grassroots level, because that is where we are talking about some sort of, empowerment of the doers of CSR. So, and that is what, even with COVID, I thought that this would be, there has been a lot of innovations. But still, and that is again going back to what Meenu was saying, the development processes, and I would say that it's not even fair to ask the corporates to understand development processes, because they have never been studied. They have never studied, right? They at least understand the development processes. So today I see that there's a huge schism between the corporates, and it has always existed, the corporates and the NGOs, because both do not understand each other. The NGOs feel it is my birthright to get the fund. But no, they have. So, and that is where I think, institutions like TISS, that is what my work in the last decade has been, to really be, and that is where you need a neutrality. You need a neutral institution, independent institution, to actually get that conversation going. Because if you have an agenda, then clearly, the corporates have, they have to show, it's all very right to say that, we all know this, that impact is generational, impact is not quarterly. But you need to understand the plight of the poor CSR manager who has to report to his boss. Now, what does he do? So each not understanding the other, I think, is a big problem. And that is where, academic institutions and, people like us, I think, come in there. Coming back to the implementation part of it. So, one thing is I like to keep it very specific to the, CSR amendment rules.
So, Rohan, very quickly, because I just need to...
I'm sorry. I'll just give it very thing to the CSR. So one thing that I think is great is that, the rules, the amended rules that as on 22nd January that have come, has really understood the importance of not-for-profits. There was a lot of, I remember the last time, Shankar, we had spoken, the not-for-profit community was very angry that they, there was a feeling that they would be left out. But the amended rules has brought them in. So CSR funds will continue to go into registered public trust, registered society. So there's no, it's clear there. What I think is a step in the right direction is a lot of NGOs are still unhappy, saying that why do we have section 12A and ATG registered? Why should we fill up that CSR form? I think it's a step in the right direction. Just because you're an NGO, government is very clear. You cannot say that main acha karna chahta hu. There has to be a method. There has to be a discipline. And if you are availing public funds, there has to be some rules. So I am, while I have been a huge advocate for civil society organizations, I am completely in agreement with this move because it will help monitor CSR better. And I think that was what the HLC, the High Level Committee on CSR 2015 as well as 2018, and that is, once that is plugged, the monitoring of CSR, I think everything will be fine. That is what the major lacunae today is. And I think the efforts are being to, plug that monitoring and evaluation, because what is happening also in monitoring is the organization who is doing the implementation is monitoring. So obviously there's bound to, that will be a problem.
No. Right. Thanks, Rohan. We'll come back to another round in a bit. Ishtiaq, to you. So I think one of the things that you said is that for Coca-Cola and indeed for many companies, working with NGOs is something that is important. You do that. But I think what we're also hearing from Rohan is it's not something which is necessarily common across corporate India. It may be the case with you, your company, but it's not common. So I want to now ask you not to wear a Coca-Cola hat, but to wear a corporate hat. And just talk to us about how companies think about these partnerships with NGOs. What do they see as the challenges with partnerships with NGOs? Because in some senses, what everybody, the others are saying is that development is a complex process. It's a process that is slow. Change is always slow. And so therefore, it is helpful to get into those collaborative processes. Yet it doesn't happen as much as perhaps it should. Or am I wrong? Or do you, in your view, does it happen a lot? So just talk to us about these corporate NGO partnerships and how they have worked and how you think they will evolve going forward.
So thank you, Shankar. I think the evolution of partnership has been a little different in the last few years, for sure. And certainly the CSR rules have played a role in that. But more than that, I think it's a general understanding of the larger partnership of ecosystem. And it's not necessarily restricted only to the so-called NGOs, CSOs or whatever. So, coming back to this problem-solving issue, for example, I'll give you specific examples. One of our major focus now is around the waste collection and the plastic waste management, for example, because you like it or not, majority of our beverages are served in plastic bottles, and therefore it is incumbent on us to make sure that they don't land up in sea or in water bodies and whatever. In that, just look at this entire ecosystem. So we started first a little bit of work with partnership of UNDP, because they had the sort of an umbrella organization which could bring in all these grassroots partnerships. And we started to run what we call the material recovery facilities, municipality by municipality. And right now we have close to about 50 of them in different municipalities across the world. But in spite of doing that, you realize that there's a completely different kind of partnership is needed, because one of the most important partner for you in that is not only the grassroots not-for-profit organization, but also the municipal corporation, because that's also the job of the municipal corporation, and all these things actually comes from there. Then you realize that, all these recyclers are not typically not-for-profit. So in order to manage all of these things, you probably need an organization which is like a startup, technology-based. You see, I really love the way Rohan talked about it. When you think of a problem, that's how businesses work. And businesses are not static. All of us know that it's dynamic. My strategy for 2019, business strategy, was very different from 18, and it's going to be very different in 2021. It will be foolhardy for us to believe that my CSR or sustainability or development strategy remains static. It cannot. It has to evolve on quarterly basis. You see, Coke is about over a century-old company. We are 134 years in existence. Now, our purpose to make a difference in the world, along with the refreshing of the world, also need to evolve over 134, 35 years. So what you do on a quarter-to-quarter basis has to make an impact which is intergenerational. And trust me, and some of these things, when you start incorporating that as a part of your doing business, you really accomplish that. I'll give you another very quick example. Water. In 2010, we made a commitment that we will be water positive by 2020. We've done that in 2015. Now there's a lot of discussion around that. Was it too feeble a goal? It was not audacious enough. Blah blah blah. Then you sit down in 2020 and say, okay, this is what we have done. Whatever, good, bad, ugly. How is this planet going to survive for next 10 years, and what is our role in that? Then you realize that, you need to be more bold and more audacious and more committed, and rather than being a doer, also become in some way an enabler of all of those things. So we said, okay, let's go back now beyond our operations? Can we improve the supply chain? Can we improve the agriculture practices through doing our supply chain management and, sustainable agriculture practices and stuff like that? What do we do in communities where we operate? Right? So in operations, in supply chain, in community, the once you start to look at it from a larger perspective, you know that this is not a 1 year goal. It'll be probably a decadal goal, but you need more partnership and more innovations and more science and technology and all of those things. And that's the kind of thinking that is really coming in many of those organizations. And one of the most important things which I think we need to really look at it is that just as NGOs or CSOs, even industry is very fragmented. We often do things what matters to us. As far as my brand is taken care of, as far as my operational four walls are taken care of, we don't really come and collaborate. And that's an important call for the industry to come together, because many problems are so interlinked with each other that we got to find solutions which is at an industrial level and not just a company level. So I think these are the kind of new partnership that I think we are looking at.
Okay, so it's getting more complex is what you're saying, and it's not just with NGOs but multiple bodies. But you're also saying it doesn't necessarily come naturally, and so there's going to be a bit of a struggle there, because. But I think it's not true just for companies. I think in India we're not by nature collaborative. I think that's part of the problem.
That's the human problem. That's the human.
And I just want to look forward, and I want to leverage your huge development knowledge and experience, not just in India but also overseas in Africa specifically, and just tell us the whole development paradigm. So again, I'm asking you to not wear your Azad hat, but as a development professional who's so experienced, how do you see the development challenges in India going forward, not from a big government perspective, but just from a CSO perspective? What are the kinds of issues that you think need to start getting focused on, which is important for CSR practitioners, both in companies and in NGOs, to look at? And how has COVID changed anything, if at all, in this? Has COVID just exposed everything that is already there, or is there something new that is coming out of the COVID? But more from I just want to think, leverage your development understanding to sort of set the kind of challenges that we're going to be facing going forward.
I find the time too little for that, Shankar. but still, I think
you have 1 minute.
Exactly. I think, I personally think the biggest challenge that we have dealing with for all these years, and we are going to continue to dealing, is inequality in our country, which has led to huge divisions between, and inequality of all kinds. There is economic inequality, there is caste-based inequality, there is sexuality, religion, there are so many divisions, and where these overlap. So for example, if you are a woman belonging to a Dalit family and you're disabled, or if you're a trans person, your experience of poverty, vulnerability, exploitation, it's so different and the divisions are so huge, and the numbers of people who are on this side of so I think that is the biggest development challenge that our country faces. How do we bring in some kind of a basic equality, across all these different divisions? And then, of course, if one starts looking at it in terms of sectors, personally coming from where we are working, I think that the poor, let's give a face to the poor. So who are the poor? Because when you talk about poor, marginalized, there are certain images that form in our mind. But to me, women and girls are really the poorest of the poor, because whatever group you might take, in that group, women and girls, if you're talking about elderly women, if you're talking about students, farmers, laborers, migrants, in every category, women and girls have been the most invisibilized, and they remain the least, being at the periphery of the mainstream in the country. And even during COVID, there has been a lot of attention given to things like food security, things like migrants, and all. But one of the biggest challenges that we have dealt with in COVID is what we now call the shadow pandemic, and that is the domestic violence. And to understand that, I mean, with men being at home all the time, women didn't even have women could not even call the helpline. The National Commission for Women had to issue a WhatsApp number so that women can at least, find a corner to send a WhatsApp. And but these are huge development issues, I feel, that need to be looked at, talked about. And the entire, change in terms of, I think there is only so much that a policy can do, but addressing the social and cultural norms, which reinforce this inequality at all levels, So I think these are some of the larger challenges that we are talking about. But I think that, listening to the other two speakers, I feel that I was just thinking about it when, they were talking about collaboration and working together and all. I think somewhere there is also some kind of a trust deficit, on both sides. And it's very difficult to build a collaboration when there is that kind of a trust deficit. I agree that, the capacity building needs to happen at the level of where the, interfaces with the communities. But, I'll just take my example. When we were setting up Sakha, even though I am supposed to be a management school graduate, I had forgotten all about, finance and whatever it is. And, I had to relearn what equity, innovation capital and all that kind of stuff is. So when large companies with, great management school graduates are leading and, fronting the CSR and all of it, I think there has to be some investment in learning about these various development, things. Otherwise, I know Rohan was referring to the social stock exchange, and some of us have actually, had our reservations towards that kind of a thing. Because the system is fine. Yes, there should be a set of rules. Yes, we should all be open to similar kind of scrutiny and all of that. The question is, who sets the rules and from whose understanding? Who defines that, and why would I have to give a greater scrutiny of my documents as against, let's say, a corporate who is investing in social stock exchange? So I think those are the basic inequalities as well that we need to look at in order to really, nurture a collaborative environment. And I think we have to remember that these are different pillars of society, right? State, corporate, and civil society. These are three fundamentally different pillars who need to work with equal partnerships to be able to make the society move. So,
thanks, Bino. I think, it was a hard question, but I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. What I would sort of paraphrase what you said. So tell me if I'm paraphrasing it wrongly. But I think from a CSR point of view, I think what I'm hearing you say is that hearing you say two things. One is that companies should be looking at issues around marginalized very, very carefully. I mean, one must understand that and understand that in that section where women and girl children are, because they are you cut it any which way, they are what they are extremely marginalized. So any amount of CSR going there is always going to be hugely beneficial, and the multiplier effect is going to be significant. And what I'm also going to tie that in with what you said earlier is that kind of CSR money should not just go for a particular transactional process like a workshop or a skill building, important though it is, but also to larger ecosystem building and ecosystem processes. So what, in some senses, I guess what you're saying, which I'm sure Ishtiaq and Rohan has already said it, is that while you need to look at quarterly returns and half yearly returns and everything else, you can also that doesn't mean that you don't invest in processes. Processes also become very, very important to the larger picture. So I think a couple of things that I just want to, and I think we'll get Kirti in to ask, to invite the question from the participants. But it's been it's a very large and complex topic that we had today, but I think we've done really, well, I've heard some really wonderful inputs from all of you. One of the things that is certainly it's certainly coming out to me, if I were to put everything together, is the sort of what certainly COVID has done is to put a magnifying glass on a lot of these problems. So they're not necessarily new problems. They are just problems that have been magnified. And I think inequality remains at the center of it. And also inequality has been magnified by the pandemic. And, you know, since I chair Oxfam India and we bring out the inequality report, and that's been much written about, I think that's come out very strongly in that report. And those of you amongst the participants who haven't had a chance to look at it, please do take a look at it, because that, I think, illustrates a lot of the things that our panelists have been speaking. So before we wrap up, just to Kirti, to you, please tell us what kind of questions you're hearing from the participants. And if you could let us know who they are addressed to, and we can then ask our panelists to respond to that. Thank you, Kirti.
Thank you, sir. We have two questions from the audience. I'll just go with the first question. It's not addressed to any particular panelist. So the question goes, how can CSR interventions systemically integrate and utilize local market actors to prevent collapse of existing markets and supply chains? Okay. And the next question...
Addressed to any particular panelist? Is that addressed to any particular panelist, Kirti? You said no.
No, sir, it's not. No, it's not addressed to anyone.
Okay.
Then the next question is, I think it's addressed directly to Ms. Meenu, because I think it's from Ms. Sujata Ramani from Pollinate Group. She says, hearty congratulations on wonderful achievement. How do you keep the women focused and committed to your intervention, working against social and family norms of women role?
Okay, thank you. So let's wrap it up. So I think first is what I'm going to do is just go to each one of you to just respond to that question, and B, just to wrap it up by saying what is if you had a wish list of 3 things that you wish the other actors in the CSR space would do, whether it's regulation companies or NGOs, what would those 3 things that should change going forward? So Meenu, let me start with you, maybe because there's a question directly at you, so you might as well respond to that, and also tell us, so what do you think will help the sector, the CSO sector, for what changes in the way companies think about it and in the way regulations think about CSR, what changes would help the CSO sector? So if those 2 take, and then I'll go to Ishtiaq and then give Rohan the last word.
Okay, so maybe begin by responding to the other question first, which said, how do we retain women? Should I do that first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So thanks, Sujata. And basically, that's what I meant by ecosystem building. And we invest in a team of community mobilizers. And there is actually, I mean, in terms of words, it's difficult to explain the kind of time and investment that it takes. But it's really holding the individuals, the women. It's working with their families very closely. It is responding to their personal and professional concerns on in a very sort of limited time and very quickly kind of thing. And it's just trying to create a space where women feel that they are respected and they are safe and they can share whatever is going on in their lives. So when we are successful in doing that, we are able to retain them through the learning journey. And actually, I think Sakha might be the smallest company in terms of the turnover and all of that. But I think we are the largest in the country to have as many women drivers that we have. I don't think the large companies, in the industry have so many. And I think it's purely because of addressing these other ecosystem issues, if I can say that. And so what the other people in the space could do, I think I would suggest that for the CSR companies, I would say, please do put in your best when you are identifying your partners. Do a complete thorough due diligence. But once you've identified your partners, strike long-term relationships that are not purely transactional in nature, but which are institution building. And, so then you can think about, because change is long-term and all of that. So I think long-term relationships, which are not focused purely on one project, one term and things like that, that is one thing I would like to suggest. I would like to see a day when, some of the partners are invited to the boardroom meetings, not to present what they have done or to share their work, but to actually hold a seminar for the leaders of the corporate sector to talk about development issues and organize those learning events, etc. And to the government or the state or the policymakers, I would like to say that when you make, because the first draft of social stock SSE that came out actually did not have anybody from the NGO sector on their board. So for God's sake, don't make policies without talking to people whom they impact. So that's it.
Thank you, Meenu. I think that is very, very good. Thank you. Ishtiaq, may I go to you? I don't know whether you want to take that question on the
local supply chain.
Yeah.
I'll do that. But okay. So my first reaction to Meenu is likewise. It's exactly what you expect of all of us is what we expect of all of you. I think let's understand this. I mean, somewhere there is, and we talked about it, there is a trust deficit. And trust deficit and behavioral changes take time, and they only get built over time. In the urban dwelling where we live, I'll not take the name of the company, but there was one breakfast cereal company that came to India, and over a period of time, through small nudging, has now moved a little bit into cold cereal-based breakfast. But at some point in time, they also had to come out with a variant called Upma. So that's the confluence of what you bring globally to a particular society and what that society brings to you. We have the aloo tikki burger here and stuff like that. So somewhere I think it's all the confluence of that. That's number one. Number two, I completely sort of agree with that notion that whether it's the government or the not-for-profit organizations or for-profit corporates, I think unless we all have that basic respect and trust for each other to sit in the room and find probably a common solution for problems, we will not really make that impact. And I think somewhere COVID-19 actually showed that. And the kind of conversations we've had with the policymakers, also with our partners and all, have been extraordinary. I mean, there have been a lot of innovative ideas in the way we really approached it. Again, coming back to the question that was asked specifically about the local supply chain, and I'll tell you, if you really think of, say, Coca-Cola, for example, there are beverages. Coca-Cola as a brand and a beverage is available in over 200 countries. But in India, we also sell beverages like Jeera in some part of India, because that's the most popular beverage in that part of the country. We started a beverage called Colors, which is essentially black grapes, because in Tamil Nadu, whenever the consumer went and asked for something like cold drink, they'll say, "Give me Colors." And it was meant to be black grapes color carbonated drink. So ultimately what happens that, in a consumer business, it's the consumer behavior and their pattern which starts to really make a difference. And oftentimes I can tell you, there was a time, and I always say that there was a trend when we were growing up, anything that was imported and foreign was looked up upon. Now it's coming back to the functionality in the locals. So even in places like Gurgaon, where I live, there are a lot of these neighborhood farms where you can actually go and plant organic vegetables, and that comes at a premium rather than a normal thing that you will get in the mandi. So I think these are trends that continue to happen, and consumers always really, come and sort of, give you premium as long as you are solving their problem and you're satiating their needs. And that's where I think the confluence of business and local partners, supply chains, and all of these things come. At the end of the day, it's all about business for the businesses, but bringing it to the responsible business is what matters.
Thank you, Ishtiaq. So the last word to you, Rohan. You emphasize the need for partnerships, for collaborations, And I think it's a good way to end by just your thoughts on what can make these collaborations more rich. I think Meenu's given some thoughts. Ishtiaq shared that. From your vantage point as a researcher, as an academic who sees both sides, what do you think needs to happen, both in terms of policy making as well as in terms of the way companies and NGOs behave vis-a-vis each other, that will promote a lot more partnerships, but because clearly that is crucial in terms of the way forward. So just your last thoughts on that.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you said last thoughts instead of last word, because I have several words. Also, I don't have any wishful thinking, because, whatever I think we wished for, and I want to take this opportunity to, inform all the larger audience that, Shankar worked very, very hard. Both of us, when we made our recommendations to the MCA about the draft rules, Shankar and me actually compiled a very, very detailed response. And we were both fighting that, not-for-profits get included. So Shankar, my compliments to you. And thank you for that work. And several not-for-profits are going to be thankful to you for that. Coming to my last few thoughts. In terms of partnership, I think moving ahead, we, till this donor-donee relationship remains, nothing will change. Okay, because that is by inherently a power relationship, right? So the moment an NGO, and I have seen this, and my work has been about telling NGOs that, when you go to a corporate for funds, don't go like this. Look him or her in the eye, because I think the problem of resources equals to funds is the problem. So the not-for-profit or the implementing agency brings resources, which could be skills, which could be sectoral expertise. So I think understanding resources, that an NGO only needs funds and a corporate only gives funds, is insulting to both of them, because a corporate is not just about giving funds. You have some great people who have ideas as well. Similarly, in the not-for-profit space, you have. So I think this donor-donee relationship has to move. It has to be abolished completely, because both, and that is where I'm talking about collaborative problem solving. So we need to move into a completely new dimension. So that's one. Not-for-profits need to look at themselves as sectoral experts. And I think that is one of the things that I have focused on. That, the moment a corporate asks you, what can you do? Most not-for-profits I know say, hum sab kar denge. Education bhi kar lenge, lively. Skill mein kya alag hai, hum to education karte hain, kar lenge. That doesn't work. For example, today, somebody who has trained to be a doctor cannot suddenly go and fly a plane, right? So not-for-profits bring with them that sectoral expertise. My appeal is to all the not-for-profits, please don't do yourselves the disservice by thinking that you're only capable of getting funds. You are capable of so much more. Okay, and that is where I think equality comes in. Having said that, I personally do not agree with the word equality, because it's an ideal word. I think what we should focus in our CSR program designs is equity, and that is also what Shankar is linked to your interest in ESG. Intergenerational equity is what is sustainability. It's as simple as that. So it's not equality that needs to be spoken about. I think equity is what is important. Also, in terms of capacity building, I think traditionally you had social workers who, they thought hame sab kuch aata hai, all kaisa development karna chahiye, hame sab aata hai. So I think that ghaman should also be broken, because HR managers also know it. Whereas HR managers think everything about the corporate, how to make money, we know. And I think that is where, a marriage has to happen. And today we need social managers, where the social worker and HR managers come together. We need to have a new breed of development professionals who are social managers, who are not, who know how to, or who know the perspective of business, but also engage at the grassroots level, at the field. And, I want to keep my concluding thoughts within the framework of COVID pandemic and the CSR rules 2021, which have just been notified. And I think that is the biggest problem, Shankar, is that, earlier assessments, companies used to make visits to the field. They used to meet, even though if it was once in a year, but at least there was a meeting, a physical presence of the corporate, of the CSR head or the CSR manager with the communities. And once that has gone, I think, that is really going to affect, because, even assessments cannot be had over the telephone, if somebody is feeling, say, humiliated as a result of a CSR intervention or non-dignified over the phone, you cannot ask, are you feeling humiliated? They will say no. So I think development has to happen on the field. You need to go, and that is where, I am a strong believer, and I always say this, Baba Amte said this, don't work for the people, work with the people. And I think COVID has ensured that that is not happening, and that is definitely going to have a lot of impact on development outcomes. To conclude, last 2 points, I think this impact assessment, because that is something we never got time to speak about, but that is something that has been made mandatory as far as the government of India is concerned. So, impact assessment. But impact assessment being mandatory in the absence of mandatory needs assessment or baseline means nothing. On what is your reference point for assessing impact if you have not done a baseline? So, that's problematic. Because we're talking about livelihoods, because we also need to talk about governance, I think. For me, CSR is all about governance. And if you're talking about governance and CSR, impact assessment will not yield anything unless we talk about social audits. And of course, for all those who don't know what social audit is, it is a mandate for all the schemes of the government. It was a mandate by the Ministry of Rural Development. So I think, Shankar, we need to move into social audit. If you really want structural, disruptive changes that we've been speaking about, impact assessment is what the law tells you to do, compliance. But if you are really a responsible corporate, if you really want to make a difference, there is nothing that stops you from commissioning a social audit. And my last, signing off thing, sorry for long words, but I think COVID-19 is a huge opportunity for the corporate sector to actually show their social conscience. Okay, so, and that has nothing to do with CSR budgets. So I want to say this. How much money you give to PM Cares, what you do has nothing to do with your social conscience. In India, INC has always, we are proud of our corporate sector. They have always risen to this occasion. And I think this is another opportunity. So basically what I'm saying is what I started with, Shankar. I don't think CSR is really the answer. We are basically talking about corporate, not responsibility, but corporate accountability and responsible business. And responsibility has nothing to do with profit. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you very much for those last thoughts. Thank you, Meenu, for your incredible contributions and I think wisdom that came in. Ishtiaq, thank you very much for bringing the practical side of what it means in a company and all the nuances that a company has to go through. But I think what is very clear is that, obviously the kind of development challenges that we have and that COVID has exposed are so complex that it needs different players to come in. And we need to recognize that each player brings a strength. And I think that's a point that even Rohan made. The kind of strength, for example, and the knowledge that Meenu talked about, saying that it's all very well to say we need to build skills, but what happens around that? You need that. You need all the skills that companies have in huge measure. And all of that needs to come in a matter of trust together to sort of build this, to change things going forward. And clearly at the same time, what we are always saying, and that's something in some senses you've also demonstrated in Coca-Cola, many companies do that CSR doesn't come at the cost of responsible business. You have to still run your business in a responsible way, and that needs to continue. CSR is over and beyond that. And I think NGOs should also recognize that while you might have a corporate partner, you also need to keep an eye on the way the company is running its own business and be able to be there to provide inputs and advice when you think the company is doing something which you don't think is responsible. So there is a lot more to this relationship than just that transaction of running a development program, because we are ultimately talking about a much larger game ahead of us, which is the development of the country. So with those words, again, thank you very much. It was a difficult topic. We never have time for these kinds of things, but that's how it is. And it's more complex when we're doing it online, not sitting in front of each other. But thank you very much for your patience, for your being there. And with those, I'll hand it back to you, Kirti.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Access, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all our panelists, and a special thanks to Mr. Venkateshwaran to nudge all our panelists to address some key questions and get forward some insightful discussion for this session. With this, we conclude our session. We'll reconvene after a short break for the next session titled Fostering Innovations Through CSR. Thank you, everyone, once again.
Thank you.